My name is Elena Carter, and I learned I was a millionaire in the dim glow of a hospital parking lot. The receipt paper trembled in my hand like it might burn through my skin, 42 million printed in numbers too clean to belong to my life. I told no one. Not my mother who says I'm dramatic when I ask for help, not my father who prefers lectures to listening, not the siblings who disappear when the check arrives. I slid the ticket into a plain envelope, tucked it under the spare tire in my trunk, and sat there long enough for the security lights to blink twice. The asphalt smelled faintly of rain even though the sky was clear, and a siren wailed somewhere blocks away. My fingers tapped the steering wheel in a jittery rhythm, a beat too fast to be calm. A voicemail from my boss buzzed in head count cuts, nothing personal. I stared at the phone until my own reflection looked like a stranger. Jaw tight, eyes red, breath caught halfway. If money reveals people, then I wanted to know who my people were. I thought about the last Thanksgiving dinner when I had paid for the entire meal because my sister had forgotten her wallet and my brother said he would Venmo me later. He never did. My parents thanked me with a smile, but also reminded me how important it was to save. That night, I had washed dishes alone while everyone else argued over board games in the living room. So when fortune dropped into my lap, it felt like a dare. I wasn't angry yet. Anger comes with certainty. What I felt was the sharp, breathless space between doubt and proof. I opened my notes app and typed a sentence I knew I couldn't take back. I need help. Not the truth, never the truth. A story small enough to be believable, urgent enough to test a pulse. I rehearsed the line under my breath, steadying my voice the way a nurse steadies a needle. Then I called the first number on my list, listening to the ring stretch thin between us, ready to hear who they were when they thought I had nothing. The morning after I realized I was rich, I sat in my car with the envelope tucked under the seat, like contraband. $42 million didn't feel like fortune. It felt like dynamite waiting for the wrong hands. I told myself no one could know, not my parents, not my siblings, not even Rachel, the friend who once slept on my couch for months. When the sun rose pale over Denver, I drove downtown and parked outside an old sandstone office building. The brass railings gleamed like they belonged to someone else's future. Inside, I met Ms. King, the attorney I had found the night before. She spoke with the calm authority of someone who had guided too many people through life-changing luck. She described blind trusts, trustees, the importance of silence. "You are allowed to protect your peace," she said, sliding papers across the polished table. Her words steadied me more than the legal jargon. For the first time, I believed I had permission not to tell. The bank came next. The private manager wore a gray tie and looked at me as though he could sense secrets behind my eyes. He talked about accounts, about withholding taxes, about moving money in pieces, so the system wouldn't choke. When he asked who I wanted to provide for, I said, "Eventually." He nodded as if fear disguised as caution was wisdom. I left with folders heavier than the envelope and a dizzy awareness that my life was no longer my own. Back in my apartment, the heater rattled like always, and the hallway smelled faintly of someone else's dinner. I poured tea and let it cool untouched on the counter. My phone buzzed with group messages from my siblings about vacation plans I hadn't been invited to, about splitting costs for ski rentals. I remembered the dinners I had paid for the loans I had extended that turned into silence, the way my father reminded me that family is about responsibility only when I was the one providing. That night, lying on my couch in the blue glow of the street lamp, I made my decision. I would test them. Not with a fortune, not with a number that would make anyone suspicious, but with an amount small enough to be believable and big enough to sting. $5,000. I would say I had lost my job, that a hospital bill had landed on my chest like an anvil, that I didn't know where else to turn. I rehearsed the words in my head the way an actor rehearses lines, feeling the weight of each syllable. It wasn't about punishing them. It was about knowing once and for all whether blood really did mean loyalty, whether family meant safety, or just another debt. My stomach turned with guilt, but under the guilt was a sharper feeling resolve. My mother answered with warmth that cooled fast when I explained. She sighed, mentioned tuition for the twins, and promised to pray for me. Her voice softened, but her wallet stayed closed. My father's call echoed across marble countertops. He spoke about resilience, his college years, of sleeping in cars, the virtue of struggle. When I reminded him I wasn't looking for philosophy, he said, "Family help creates entitlement." Then his meeting alarm rang and the line went dead. My sister sent a voice memo, half pity, half comedy. She claimed she was broke after buying a ski pass, promised to see what she could do, then posted lattes and croissants on Instagram. I listened twice to be sure I hadn't misheard. Mark, my brother, sounded genuinely concerned. He said he'd help once he moved money from investments, asked me to wait. When I pressed about the bill's deadline, silence filled the line. He promised to call back that night. He didn't. I turned reluctantly to Rachel. We'd carried each other through college, traded debts and secrets. I reminded her of the rent money I'd once sent. She texted sympathy, then promised to check accounts. The dots blinked, disappeared, returned, then silence. Hours later, she sent another message asking if I could wait until Monday. I said yes, though I knew I wouldn't hear more. Finally, I met Uncle Thomas, who thrived on lectures dressed as favors. He ordered for both of us at a steakhouse, spoke about compound interest, and framed my crisis as a lack of discipline. He offered $2,000 on the condition I write a financial plan and attend a course he recommended. He insisted I thank him later. I left with leftovers I couldn't eat and a business card I didn't want. Back home, my notes app filled with one-line verdicts, mom prayers only, dad lectures, Sophie empty promises, Mark vanished, Rachel excuses, Thomas strings attached. I sat in the dark, laughter rising in me like static. Not joy, not even bitterness, just the sharp clarity of knowing exactly where I stood. I hadn't expected money, I'd expected proof. And proof had arrived, ugly and undeniable. When the room quieted, my thumb hovered over one last contact. Aunt Emma. She lived 2 states away, in a small town, retired nurse, single, her whole life. She once mailed me care packages of homemade granola, even when postage cost more than the food. She was my last number, the one I had saved for when I couldn't bear another disappointment. I pressed call. The ring hummed steady until her voice answered warm, certain. She asked if I'd eaten. She told me to sit down. And when I haltingly explained my supposed need, she didn't hesitate. "I'll send what I have," she said. "And if that's not enough, come stay with me until you're back on your feet." Her words didn't land like money. They landed like shelter. I sat on the couch like she told me, the prepaid phone pressed between both palms. Emma's voice came steady across the line, calm in the way waves are calm when you're standing on the shore, no matter what storms rage farther out. 5,000 isn't nothing, she said, but we'll figure it out. I've got 3 saved, and I can pull the rest from my pension account if I have to. I opened my mouth to stop her, then closed it again. The words stuck heavy as lead. I had imagined this conversation in a dozen different ways, most of them ending in polite refusal. I hadn't prepared for unconditional yes. "Emma," I whispered, but my throat tightened before I could explain. "Listen to me," she went on. "You don't need to apologize for asking. Families are supposed to catch each other when the net breaks. You've carried more weight than you should already." I felt tears climb fast, hot behind my eyes, and I pressed the heel of my hand against my cheek like pressure could hold them back. No one else had said anything close to that. No one else had even tried. She asked me to promise I'd eat something tonight. She told me about the casserole she'd baked that morning, describing the golden crust, the smell of onions and rosemary filling her kitchen. The details broke me, not because they were grand, but because they were ordinary, offered freely, like love should be. "Emma," I said again. Steadier this time, "I need to tell you the truth." Silence stretched, but it wasn't the kind that judged. It was the kind that waited. I didn't lose my job. I didn't get sick. The words tangled, then burst free. I won the lottery. 42 million. I made up the story to see who would stand by me without knowing. On her end, the line held quiet for a beat, then 2. My chest pounded with the certainty I had ruined the only relationship that still felt pure. "Well," she said at last, "that explains why you sound so nervous." I let out a ragged laugh that was half sob. You're not angry? Why would I be? You asked for help, I offered it. That part was real. The rest? She paused, choosing her words carefully. The rest just shows you were scared, and you were right to be. The relief came sudden, like a dam breaking. My body slumped against the cushions, and I realized I had been bracing for punishment since the first call to my mother. I didn't mean to trick you, I said. I just needed to know. And now you do. Her tone softened further. Money doesn't change people. It shows them. That's all. I told her everything, then the attorney. The blind trust. The folders stacked like bricks on my table, the silence I'd kept like armor. She listened without interrupting the way only someone who has spent a lifetime listening can. When I finished, she let out a slow breath. So what happens now, she asked. I wiped at my face with the sleeve of my sweater. Now I want to do something good with it. Not just survive, not just hide. She chuckled softly. That sounds like the Elena I know. The rest of the night blurred into comfort. We talked about small things, her neighbor's new puppy, the price of gas in her town, the garden she wanted to plant come spring. She never circled back to the money, unless I did, and even then, she treated it like background music, not the main song. It was the first time since the winning numbers appeared that I felt anything close to normal. Before we hung up, she said, "Come visit me this weekend. We'll sit on the porch and you can tell me everything again in person. I'll make that casserole." I promised I would. When the call ended, the apartment seemed less empty, as if her warmth had seeped through the wires and filled the air. For the first time in days, I slept without waking every hour. My dreams weren't about money or betrayal. They were about sunlight and a kitchen that smelled like rosemary. The next morning, I packed a bag and drove west. The highway unrolled under my tires, mile after mile of sky, stretching wide enough to hold secrets and still leave room for forgiveness. When I reached her small house with the white porch swing, she was already waiting outside, apron dusted with flower arms open. I walked up the steps, heart hammering, and when she hugged me, it felt like I'd been carrying a backpack full of bricks and finally set it down. Inside, the casserole sat on the counter, steam curling like a signal. She set a plate in front of me before I could protest and said grace, thanking not for wealth but for family. I wanted to cry again, but instead I ate, and each bite tasted like home I thought I'd lost. Later, while we washed dishes side by side, I told her my plan in fuller detail. I wanted to start a foundation for seniors who lived alone to make sure no one felt abandoned when they needed help most. I explained how I'd fund it quietly, how I'd keep my name off press releases, how I wanted it to be about the people, not me. She dried a plate, set it gently in the cabinet, and said, "Then you've already turned your luck into purpose." I looked at her, at the lines around her eyes carved by years of work and laughter, and realized she had given me more than any amount of money ever could. She had given me proof that love without conditions still existed. That was the night the storm inside me began to settle. 1 year later, I stood at the back of a community center, painted the pale green of school chalkboards. Folding chairs filled the hall, occupied by seniors who had answered the flyers and phone calls we sent. Some came with walkers, some with grandchildren trailing behind them, some with nothing but a worn jacket and the hope of conversation. On the stage, a banner stretched across 2 stands, Silver Light Foundation, because no one should age alone. Emma sat in the front row, her hair shorter than last year, her shoulders straighter. The house I'd bought her was only 5 miles from mine, close enough that we traded meals twice a week and shared the same doctor's office. She didn't know every detail of my finances. She didn't want to, but she accepted the home as a gift. Without arguing, saying only that walls mean little, unless they hold family. I walked to the microphone and introduced the foundation, explaining our mission: transportation, for medical appointments, weekly check-ins, small grants for emergencies. My voice wavered when I described the volunteers who had already delivered over 300 meals in the last 6 months. And when I looked down to see Emma smiling up at me, steadiness returned. Afterward, People lined up to shake my hand to tell me stories about loneliness and gratitude. One man described how he hadn't spoken to anyone in 3 days before a volunteer knocked on his door with soup. A woman pressed a photo of her late husband into my palm and said the foundation gave her a reason to get dressed in the morning. Each hand that squeezed mine felt like another thread binding me to something larger than myself. When the hall emptied, Emma and I lingered. She touched the banner, tracing the letters with her finger. "You built this out of truth," she said. I shook my head. "I built it out of fear, and you turned it into truth." She didn't argue. She didn't need to. The rest of my family learned pieces of my new life in fragmented ways. Sophie called once, frantic about a credit card balance, and weeks later received an anonymous payment from a hardship fund. Mark's back injury led him to a rehab facility whose bills quietly disappeared. Even my father, when pneumonia struck, found his hospital stay covered by an unnamed donor. None of them knew the donor was me. None of them knew I had chosen distance, not revenge. When my mother left a voicemail last Thanksgiving, she filled it with scripture about providence. I listened, deleted it, and then donated to the food bank in her county under the foundation's name. The gesture wasn't forgiveness, not exactly. It was boundary and mercy stitched together, a quilt I could live beneath. At night, when the apartment quieted, I sometimes opened the folder that still held the original documents, the ticket copy, the blind trust papers, the letters from lawyers. I would run a finger across the embossed seals and remember the first days when I thought wealth meant silence. Now I understood it meant choice. And I had chosen to turn betrayal into fuel to let Emma's love guide where the current carried me. One evening, sitting on Emma's porch, while cicadas rasped in the trees, she asked whether I regretted the test. I stared at the sky, deepening into indigo. "I regret the need for it," I said. "But without it, I wouldn't know who stands with me when everything else falls away." She handed me a glass of lemonade condensation, damp against my hand. Then it wasn't about money at all. I nodded, the truth so simple, it almost hurt. The following week, a local paper asked for an interview about the foundation. I declined, sending them statistics instead, meal served, rides given, prescriptions delivered. I wanted the spotlight to fall on the people we helped, not on me. My name never appeared in print, and that anonymity felt richer than the jackpot ever had. When I tell this story now, people lean forward expecting scandal. They want the juicy part, the betrayals, the curses at family dinners. But that's not the story I carry. What I carry is the sound of Emma's voice on a cold Friday night, saying she would help without hesitation. What I carry is the lesson that wealth doesn't sculpt character, it strips it bare. The millions sit in accounts managed by professionals who speak in percentages, but the real fortune is measured in casseroles and porch lights, in the certainty that one person's love can outweigh a room full of disappointments. Sometimes I drive past the old office building where my boss once left me a voicemail about layoffs. The windows still glow late into the night. I wonder whether anyone inside knows that life can pivot on a single moment, a single number printed on a slip of paper. I wonder if they understand that what you do with luck matters less than who stands with you when it arrives. Back at home, Emma's laughter filters through the walls, carried on the smell of something baking. I set the table, 2 plates, 2 forks, the kind of detail that seems ordinary until you remember the nights when no one answered the phone. I never told the rest of them. I don't need to. My story isn't about what they failed to give. It's about what one person chose to offer freely and fully when she had almost nothing left. That's the inheritance I claim, and the one I'll spend the rest of my life protecting. And if you asked me what $42 million bought, I'd tell you this: a chance to discover the rarest kind of wealth, the kind that can't be counted, only kept. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.